Okay, welcome to Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. We've got a show for you today. First of all, I'm going to interview Brian Karem. You may know him from the time he asked Trump. He's a journalist, White House press corps. He's the one who asked Trump if, Trump would commit to a peaceful transition of power. And he revealed exactly what Trump would or was planning in terms of the January 6th non-peaceful transfer of power that he was hoping for. Long conversation with him. He has a new book out about press freedom. We'll be talking about sort of the descent into the destruction of the free press here in the United States, what corporate forces there were, how both sides do it, and all of that good stuff. So we're looking forward to that conversation. I also have a piece for you at the end of the show. We got a peek at, the Democrats had a little the progressive Democrats had a summit strategy, the Progressive Strategy Summit, where they talked about the strategies they've been using so far, what they've learned, what's been working, what hasn't been working, and what they plan to do in the future. So basically, everyone says the Democrats don't have a plan. Well, some of the Democrats, the progressive Democrats, do have a plan. We're going to be hearing from Bernie Sanders, Senator Jayapal. We're going to be hearing from there's a lot of people, so stay tuned for that. But up first, we're starting with one of my favorite segments, and I can actually do this segment because I am an American of Italian descent. The segment coming up right now, another Embarrassing Paesan.
Figli di puttana! Disgrazia! Scena! Corno! Qua a Napoli dove mamma! I corni! A fanculo dove nanna! Hai capito? You son of a bitch!
Okay, I could not like that opening better. Thank you very much to the team at act.tv who helped me put that together. All right, today's Embarrassing Paesan is a lawyer who recently was found guilty of defrauding movie star Stormy Daniels out of hundreds of thousands of dollars after he originally represented her against Trump. You'll recall she wanted to escape the terms of a hush payment deal that kept her from speaking publicly about an alleged sexual encounter with the former president. You know, the one where we all found out he has a mushroom penis? Yeah, that's the one. That's right. Our Embarrassing Paesan of the week is Michael Avenatti. Now, I want to say that, Michael Avenatti, I really did want to like you. I really did, especially after you originally started representing Miss Daniels, and then you made that very entertaining and cathartic string of cable news appearances in which you really told the truth about Donald Trump, like this one.
Disgrace. Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Never in my lifetime did I think that I would witness behavior like this from the president of the United States. I'm a father to 2 daughters, and I know many of your viewers are also fathers and mothers. How do you tell your kids to look up to the president of the United States when he behaves in this manner? It's an absolute joke, and it's a disgrace.
And of course, there was also this one.
Well, if anyone knows a con, I guess it would be Donald Trump, based on the last 2 years, Chris. Look, this guy has zero credibility in the eyes of most Americans and certainly in the eyes of the world. He's a habitual liar. He is trying to distract away from the very serious allegations made by multiple women.
Remember, Avenatti was one of the first people out there calling Trump what he is in a public sphere. He was the first one, really, one of the first ones to give permission to everyone to really take the gloves off. And this was at a time when the news media was still talking about Trump and treating him with the reverence that they usually treat someone who holds the highest office in the land. Remember that? And also, I liked Avenatti's stunts, like when Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, was raided by the FBI. Remember that? In connection with tax evasion and payments made to women on Trump's behalf. Avenatti contributed to that spectacle by bringing Stormy Daniels to the federal courthouse. And now, He's defrauded her out of nearly $300,000 she was supposed to get for writing a book about an alleged tryst with former President Donald Trump. Don't do that, Michael. Why did you do that? You embarrass me and disappoint. You disappoint me. You can't you just use that showmanship, the brazen truth-telling, the classic Italian ability to figure things out and find a good angle to use them? Can't you just use that all for good instead of for evil? Don't get me started on classic Italian machismo and how bilking a woman out of hundreds of thousands of dollars didn't set off any of your red flags. Well, anyway, I'm sure he didn't act like that because he is Italian. It's probably because he was a lawyer. But I'm still disappointed. That was another embarrassing Paesan. You're watching ACT TV. Stay with us. Well, people, one of the reasons I host this show is because I don't believe that we can have justice or freedom or democracy without true journalism. Clearly, the forces of corporatism agree with me, and that's why they've been systematically dismantling the Fourth Estate since before I was born. But where are we now with this? Joining us to talk about the attack on press freedom is award-winning veteran investigative reporter Brian Karem. I'm sure you already know him. Remember early in the Trump administration? There was that journalist who had his press credentials revoked for asking an actual question and thereby revealing Trump's authoritarian views on how the press should function. Well, that was him. Our guest is also the same journalist who asked Trump if he would commit to a peaceful transition of power. Let's recall that moment. Roll the video, Giancarlo.
Right here, Mr. President, real quickly, win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? There has been rioting in Louisville. There's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
Mr. President, the second question is,
Absolutely chilling. I think that's enough of that.
You asked the question.
Absolutely chilling. Well, we all know how that turned out. Brian Karem joining us today. He has a new book out, Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. It reveals how journalism and the free speech it relies on became so endangered, and what is our great hope for resuscitating it? That's coming up next in our interview section. Stay tuned. Brian Karem joins us today. Brian, thank you so much for being on the program with me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, it's really an honor to have you here after you did the nation an enormous public service by doing what actual journalists do, holding the feet of our elected officials to the fire. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. That's kind of the job.
Right. Has there been fallout from that, either positive or negative for you?
You mean after September 23rd? Well, after the insurrection, that was the last day I think I got death threats. So it's been a year now with President Biden. So it's been kind of nice not having to go to work with death threats. But there are those who there are those on Capitol Hill who still won't talk to me because, of course, they're part of the Trumplican party and are convinced that the best way to ensure democracy is by destroying it. So we don't have much to say in that regard, but otherwise it's all good. It's, it's part and parcel, par for the course.
you've been talking about, or you in your book, you talk about the decimation of the press, and you detail the bipartisan nature of the takedown. Can you give us a little walk through recent presidential history so everyone knows it's not just a one-sided issue?
Yeah, sure. We can start with Nixon. That's where
That's
Nixon and
where it
Roger
always
Ailes they began it. It was Ronald Reagan who codified it and actually put it into place because Nixon was bounced out of office before he could do what he wanted, and he wanted a very favorable. He wanted a media that was subservient to him. Nixon couldn't do it, but Reagan, he got rid of the fairness doctrine. He allowed news media empires to buy themselves up, thereby destroying the independence of the press, and it led to where we are now. Now, after that,
briefly, just the fairness doctrine is when equal time needed to be devoted from candidates of different parties.
More than that, the fairness doctrine gave birth to television news. It was because they had to donate time to public affairs programming and to give both sides of an issue that gave us television news. And getting rid of it, it created silos of media coverage. Today, people go to where they want to find the news that agrees with what they already agree with. Mm-hmm. So we end up with news today that's not news. It's not what we need to see, read, or hear. It's what we want to see, read, or hear. And many times it influences and stratifies and codifies our own ignorance instead of enlightening people. So both sides have done it. The Clinton administration, of course, with the Telecommunication Act 1996, he didn't write it, but he signed it. And
what did that do?
What that did more than anything else, if you go to a radio station anywhere in the country, it's probably owned by iHeartRadio. Right. And that's one of the big things that happened with the Telecommunication Act and Sinclair Television and Media. There used to be limits on the number of properties you could own, particularly in one market, because we didn't want monopolies, because we saw monopolies as bad. Now they're considered de rigueur, and they are part and parcel of what we see and read and hear and watch every day. And that gave it. And then, of course, you can go to George W. Bush and the Patriot Act, which helped government spy on reporters. Then you can go to the Obama administration, which used the Espionage Act 8 times to go after whistleblowers. So, and then of course you have Trump, who was he just sat at the table that was set by all the other presidents, and then proceeded to defecate all over it and tear it asunder. Mm-hmm. And then and Biden has even had his problems. Biden, the Jamal Khashoggi on the campaign trail, he promised to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for killing. And this is a journalist who lived in the United States, worked for a United States publication, and was killed abroad in Turkey. And all the evidence points to someone inside the Saudi empire as the crown prince, who is behind it. And Biden promised to punish this guy and punish Saudi Arabia, and hasn't done it. So every president has been a problem. Every president has guided us down this path to where we no longer have free speech in this country.
In the end of your book, you talk about the things that we can do, obviously turning back the clock on some of these things that you just mentioned, but why would any president do them? I mean, you'd really need a president who is committed to democracy and not their own party. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, yeah, but if you appeal to their own self-interest, it's also in their best interest. Getting them to understand that is difficult because they don't see anything other than control as benefiting their self-interest. But the real truth of the matter is that a free and impartial press enables us to hold everyone accountable, which is why one of the things I recommend in the book is, and it had bipartisan support, was a shield law. So reporters a national shield law, which would enable reporters to keep confidential sources and not have to go to jail if they didn't want to disclose those sources, right? So the last time that was introduced, it was Jim Jordan and Jamie Raskin who co-sponsored that bill. Now, you can't find two different people on the political spectrum than those two. And Mike Pence had introduced one. They realized that free speech and the ability to investigate benefits everyone. and well, actually, they saw it as benefiting them going against their opponents, but that meshed in the fact that everybody saw that it would assist free speech. But we don't have that type of cooperation available to us today. So it's very, very difficult to get anyone to look at the problems that are in the press. Everyone gripes about the press. Some say we lean left, some say we lean right. And what no one, after 40 years in this business, I can tell you what we don't understand, what people not in this business, what we don't understand if we're not in this business is that we're not tilted to the left or the right. We're tilted toward money. Right. Whatever makes us a profit is. So if the American public wanted better and turned us off, we'd have to give better in order to sell. And we don't do that. There's no incentive.
But what would a financial incentive be? I mean, you don't want state-run media. We already have that at Fox. But I mean, what? And then there's independent public media like NPR, but they are taking huge amounts of money from different corporations. So where are we going for information that's still journalistically integrous, but not corporate control?
You have to divorce journalism. It cannot be intertwined with capitalism. I'm a great capitalist. Go out and buy as many copies of my book as you want. I'll be happy to sell them to you. But that's not the way journalism works. And so you have to have, there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, the government has always, the real problem is a lack of, it's community journalism. That's the backbone of journalism. That's where it all begins. And, the daily neighborhood newspaper doesn't exist anymore. And some people say, well, it can't exist in today's age. Yeah, it could if it gave decent information. We just don't have them around. So one of the problems there is local, state, and federal governments have cut back on public notice ads, which underwrites a lot of that. And these ads serve two purposes. They're a revenue stream for small newspapers, but they also provide what we really need out of government more than anything else, and that's transparency. When do you go? When's the county commissioner meeting? What's going on in your high school sports team? What's going on with an estate sale? All those legal notices those legal notice ads that were in newspapers were also help build a community. You'd have salesmen, you'd have the lawyers, you'd have car salesmen look and say, oh, look who got a raise, oh, look who moved here, oh, what estate went on sale, oh, what merger happened here. And you could find, and it helped build a community. You and I may disagree at the national level about politics, but I guarantee everybody living in your neighborhood wants a paved road and a cleaned, and a street light that works and clean water and air. And so those things that build communities, if we start there by breaking up media monopolies, which is the big thing, and then supporting community journalism, those two things alone would drive great lengths to solving the problem. And you provide, low interest loans. You provide, what if, for example, on your income tax, you got a $100 rebate if you could prove that you subscribe to a daily newspaper? That alone would help subsidize real news. And you don't have that anymore at all.
Brian, it seems like these forces, I really, what you're saying right now is making me think about how it is very hard to know what's going on in your local town, and that national news can be so polarizing. And now we're very polarized against each other, even though we share a lot of similar interests, as you made mention of the roads, bridges, etc. It seems like it's by design. I hate to be that way, but it's by design. Yes, they want us to be polarized.
It's designed by the government for control, and the same thing by big business. Because look, the government benefits when they control the message, and it's all propaganda. And Edward R. Murrow warned us of this in 1958 at the Radio Television News Directors Association meeting in that year, and this is in the book. He was the keynote speaker, and he said, listen, if we don't clean up our act, pretty soon all we're going to do is listen to slogans and propaganda. And here we are. And that's a huge problem. And you've got it now on the business side of it. The smaller number of businesses create greater profit, but they never reinvest in the product. So what you get in journalism today, it's like buying a brand new Cadillac without an engine. It doesn't really go anywhere. It looks pretty. I mean, you turn on CNN, and I've been on these talk shows, these panel shows. Boy, it looks like we're discussing the issues, but we're not. It's 5 minutes of arguing back and forth with an anchor who doesn't know what they're talking about usually. And at the end, we're back at the same place we were when we started, which is, not really presenting you news. It's infotainment. When I first got into this business, 80% of what you see, read, or hear was run by 24 companies. Today, more than 90% of what you see, read, and hear is run by about 6 companies. There's twice the number of people on this planet as on the day that I was born, and half the number of reporters. There's your problem.
I have a lot of questions for you following up on that, on that issue. What are your thoughts about what's happened in terms of online media? We've got, we don't have to name names, or we can, but we've got a lot of these online people who have gained audiences because people do not believe, they don't find the mainstream media, the corporate media, to be a trusted source anymore. They're looking for kind of a gatekeeper that they can trust. And then that gatekeeper does not have necessarily journalism in their background and understand what they're doing in terms of journalism.
Well, that's not necessarily just the online people. There are plenty of people in mainstream media who have no idea what they're doing either.
Yes, probably true. Yes,
you're not going to get rid of online media, and I don't think you should, because it's a great democratization.
No, I don't think so either.
Of what we do, but there are certain guidelines, and I put these in the book. Certain things that we could adhere to. First of all, you're not a journalist unless you at least have a copy editor. You're a blogger, you're an opinion writer, fine, label it as such. But if you're going to actually report facts, you need to be there to witness them, which is what journalism has fundamentally been forever. A witness, if you're the first person to see it, you're there, okay? The young woman who got the Pulitzer Prize, a special Pulitzer Prize, for recording a gentleman having his neck stepped on and killed by police. We all know that video. That was an act of journalism. She wasn't a journalist, but it was an act of journalism, recording and then disseminating the information with no editorial content. That's the purest form of journalism. If we adhere to those standards online, and I put some of those out there in this book, how you can do that, then fine. It's the fact that we can't understand, we don't know for sure when we see something online. Is it real? Is it imagined? Is it deep fake? What is it? Which is why you also need to support newspapers. Look, I can hack anything online, right? I can change it. It's ethereal, it's ephemeral, it can change. But that newspaper that I have in my collection, printed in 1815, remains the same today as it was on the day it was printed. It's finite, it's accountable, and in many ways superior to what you see online today. There is a place in our consumption of news for both, and we need to support both.
That's interesting. You've made me feel good about myself, because that's what we do at ActTV. As we go to events, live street events, we go to protests, et cetera, and we bring the coverage, we live stream the coverage.
Right.
We were, part of that movement of independent media, of
non-corporate
media, who just went on the street with live streaming technology has allowed people to do acts of journalism, as you call them.
Well, and I have reporters. I mentored a lot of young journalists and ran 2 community newspapers for 12 years. And the big thing I always tell young reporters, and this is how I separate a reporter from an opinion writer, is I would have reporters come to me and go, "Oh, this is what I think." And I go, "I don't care what you think. I barely care what I think. What do you know?" Well, let's go out and vet the facts. If you can present vetted facts and you have a copy editor going through those vetted facts, someone who's not you, who can go through the tape or your copy or your stand-up or the 12-inch column that you've written, and go, "All right, what do you mean here? What's the fact there? Where'd you get that quote?" And holding people accountable, that's journalism. And we need far more of it. But there are a lot of people who just get online and pretend that they're journalists without ever understanding what it is that journalism really is. And that takes a bit, doesn't take a college degree. It takes a curious mind, and it takes diligence. And those two things, journalism has always attracted those type of people, but keeping them is hard because we don't make any money.
Bringing me right to my next question. In your book, you talked about the role hedge funds are playing in the decimation of the free press. Talk a little bit about that here.
Well, hedge funds have destroyed newspapers. I mean, I call them vulture capitalists, and those venture capitalists that go out and buy up hundreds of newspapers. what they do is they're accountable to the bottom line. So, you know, those people sitting in a board, you know, in a boardroom going, all right, how do we increase profits this week? Well, let's get rid of, you know, there are newspapers today, by the way, mainstream newspapers that don't have copy editors because they were deemed too expensive, which is why, you know, people complain that there's a problem with the news, and there is. And that's because we don't have anybody doing what you need to do to call it news. I mean, if you want to retain credibility, the first thing I was taught when I was a young lad was that you spell the names right. How can I believe anything else that you're printing about me if you don't get my name right? And there's a lot of that. So that's, you know, the copy editing, the hedge fund investors, every newspaper I've ever worked at has closed or been bought out over the last 40 years. And that's frightening and sad. And in many ways tells you about the death of American journalism. I mean, I got in right at the zenith and have followed it through its nadir. And it's frustrating on many levels. And those venture capitalists have destroyed those, like the Alden Group and others that have bought out newspapers and closed them down. You know, we were always told, like when I first got into newspapers, hey, we've got computers in the newsroom now, so we're going to save money on typesetting. Great. So we can hire more reporters? No. It means the people who own the newspaper are making more money. Aren't you happy? Do I get a raise? No. But don't you feel happy that there's fewer of you here?
How about cooperatives? You know, reporting cooperatives where the money has to go either back to the workers or back to the people.
Yeah, unions have always been good about that, and they don't want to unionize reporters. They're scared to death of that. But
are they?
Yeah, owners don't want unions.
Well, yeah. I thought you meant the unions don't want the reporters.
No, union. Any union member wants to see more unions. And look, Ronald Reagan started that. He busted up PAPCO. I mean, every unions, and they've been sold because of this trickle down economics. They've been sold as something anathema to democracy when in fact they're the epitome of it. You know, small fiefdoms owned by rich white guys who own everything is not how you demonstrate democracy. That's feudalism. I mean, you know, they scream about socialism. I'm more worried about feudalism.
So you were once jailed for protecting your source. I'm wondering if you can comment on the jailing and treatment of Julian Assange. I know it's kind of an out there question. You didn't touch on it in your book, but
yeah.
Hey, why not?
Well, I think the jailing of anyone doing an act of journalism is anathema to the democratic process. And I did not cover Julian Assange that much, but I understand the very concept of what he went through was journalism, and releasing that information was an act of journalism. Now, you can paint him any way you want, but that's a fact. And so, yes, I would, you know, it's like every time a few years back, there are about a dozen of us in this country that have gone to jail to protect a confidential source. And at the National Press Club here in DC about 5 years ago, I got together most of us that were alive that have done it. I called ourselves the first Jailbirds Club. And we got together before our meeting and our TED Talk type of thing. And we got together in this room and we all started talking. And we found out that all of us had pretty much the same experience. Those who arrested us, those who put us in jail, all claimed that they supported the First Amendment, that they were big supporters of the First Amendment, but not in our particular case, because what we did was wrong. And so it's always about them bending the rules instead of allowing journalism to exist. They say, oh yeah, we support it, except when it really hurts. Then we don't support it. Well, then you're not supporting it. And that was an eye opener to me. So those who go after anyone, you know, doing an act of journalism, to me, that's antithetical to the First Amendment.
We've already talked about some of the ways to revive journalism. First of all, the second part of your book title is how to revive it. Did they make you put and how to revive it in your book? So
no,
I scare and depress everyone.
No, I wanted that because everyone says it's dead and that the golden age of journalism has passed. Well, I've never known a golden age of journalism. So God bless.
I was wondering, what was it like before Nixon? I wasn't here. So I mean, was it like
golden age? I'm telling you.
There was always some problem, right?
Yeah, but what I did see was a way to show people how it could be done correctly and why people on the left and people on the right and people in the middle get it wrong and what they get right about the problems. There are deep-seated, horrible problems in journalism, but it has absolutely nothing to do with what people think it has something to do with. And so I wanted to show people how you could fix it.
Oh, excuse me. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program today. The book is Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. And again, I want to thank you for holding President Trump's feet to the fire. You said it was all in the name of a day's work, or that it's your job, but it is difficult to do your job sometimes when, the march of tyranny is right in front of you. So thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate you putting yourself on the line that way.
Thank you for having me on the show anytime. It was enjoyable.
Great. Thank you. I will be calling you back because you were fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
You're watching ACT TV. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. Julianna Forlano here with your action rundown. Guess what happened? There's a lot, well, you know this already. There's a lot of disempowering talk about how the Democrats don't have a plan, and maybe they don't, or at least not one that is cutting through the corporate media static or the online algorithm tyranny. But the progressive wing actually does have a plan. I'm not saying it's good or that it's going to work, but we got a sneak peek at the Progressive Strategy Summit, where a lot of folks were there to explain all of those strategies to us. And surprise, surprise, the summit included grassroots leaders, policy advocates, labor movement people, electeds, and even artists from people-led movements across the country. When is the last time you saw anyone to the right of progressive have an artist or labor person or someone like that, anyone other than the Chamber of Commerce at their strategy summits? The summit was several hours, actually, and they went over their successes and challenges from the past year, and they laid out their plan for the next year. And don't worry, we edited out all the wonk to bring you the general idea. That's coming up next in our action rundown. So we're going over the Progressive Strategy Summit in this action rundown. First up, Bernie Sanders, their senator from Vermont, who he basically said the strategy that the main Democratic leadership is using is all wrong.
I happen to believe that the current strategy of the Democratic leadership is wrong. I think that for the last 6 months, we have cajoled, we have begged, we have compromised, we have negotiated, we have sat in back rooms for endless conversations to get these two senators to pass, they help us pass the Voting Rights Act, which is so significant if we're going to maintain American democracy, and to pass Build Back Better to protect the working families of this country. And we have failed. We have failed from a policy point of view. We haven't succeeded. And we have failed from a political point of view in the sense that our people, our supporters, are becoming demoralized. And what polls show is that everything continues the way it is. The Republicans stand a good chance of regaining the House and, in fact, taking the Senate. So I think we've got to change course. And I think what we have got to do is what democracy is all about. We got to bring the issues that impact the working class of this country onto the floor of the United States Senate, and we've got to vote. And if every Republican wants to vote against doing all of the things that are overwhelmingly popular that the American people want, they're going to have to go home and explain it to their constituents. And if Senators Manchin and Sinema want to do the same, they're going to have to go home and explain it to their constituents. But what we have got to do now, and do it very quickly, is show the working families of this country that at least 48 of us in the U.S. Senate are prepared to stand with them We're prepared to take on the wealthy, the powerful, the oligarchs, and we're prepared to fight for a series, an agenda of proposals which meet the needs, the long neglected needs of working families.
Oh, man. Let's leave it to Bernie to say that we should use our progressive might to burn the whole thing down. I love the way he brought up the idea that we have to talk directly to the working families, because who among you are not a working family? Congresswoman Jayapal from Washington also talked about how the progressives stood together and used block voting. That's what they're doing for the Build Back Better. They're using the power of the progressive bloc to get things done. And that was the strategy that led to Build Back Better getting passed in the House. Let's take a listen.
Required building relationships, engaging and organizing members, and developing both strategy and tactics that could support a block play inside Congress with the movement outside alongside us. It meant instituting rules reforms and establishing a real value add for engaged CPC membership and developing a clear and disciplined message on a core set of priorities with full member buy-in. Ultimately, we needed people to believe in block voting, to feel and flex their power for the first time. And feel it we did. Courage begets courage, and strength always emerges in moments of crisis. I know you all know this feeling. It's an electric thing to be a part of. People coming together to fight for what they believe in and do something greater than anyone could do on their own. Progressives in the House held the line twice, plus a third very long day, holding to our maximum point of leverage to force the Build Back Better plan from an idea to an actual piece of legislation that included nearly all of our progressive priorities: universal pre-K and childcare, funding to address homelessness and repair our crumbling public housing, lowering the cost of prescription drugs and expanding healthcare access, immigration reform, home-based care for seniors and people with disabilities, and funding to raise the wages of care workers. Had we not done this, Build Back Better would have never passed through the House. Now, I recognize that it's not yet passed in the Senate, and our work remains to do so. But let us mark what has truly been an unprecedented display of organizing, courage, and collective power from our Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House.
I mean, it certainly goes against the narrative that Democrats don't have a spine or a plan or a message. Well, at least the progressive Democrats have a spine, which they are showing, and a plan, which they are telling us about, and a message. Congressman Mark Pocan from Wisconsin spoke on getting even more resolute and more firm, given what he calls the historic legislative obstruction by our own freaking party members. Those were my words, not his. And Pocan makes a bold case for just bringing on the executive orders. Here he is.
The things that can still happen with this, we have to say it, really historic amount of obstruction that we're facing in Congress. It may be a 50-50 Senate. It may be a less than a handful margin in the House, but the obstruction I have never seen in my now 10th year in Congress. One of the areas that we really want to see are aggressive use of executive action by the president. Now, granted, it's not going to be as long-term as actual law changes, because a future president can change things. But a lot of these are going to be hard to change once they're put in place. And we need to work directly with the Biden administration on being as creative as possible. So while we want to get Build Back Better done by the time that we're going to have the State of the Union, we also should be looking at every aspect of it, what can be done via executive order, because we've all spent months and months and months talking about these direct benefits to people. We have to be able to make sure we can show how another path can happen if for some reason some components don't make it through and Build Back Better. But there's so much more we can do too. We can go into actually things that can reduce the cost of prescription drugs. We can address climate change very directly in a number of substantive ways. We can add to worker power. Even though we can't through reconciliation pass the PRO Act, the most important labor legislation we've seen since I've been to Congress. We can do a lot of other provisions that'll give workers an even playing field in a lot of ways very creatively. We can also address the care economy and immigration, social justice, and so much more. So we are very focused as a progressive caucus in not only passing the bills that Pramila talked about, but also working with the administration to do what they can within their power. If you're going to have obstructionists in the House and Senate, then we have to be able to give the tools directly to the Biden administration so we can get these things done. And I think it's quite possible.
Well, I think he's right. I mean, Biden did have to wait a few months to show the damage that the obstruction is doing before he could really feasibly come out of the box swinging his bic like the pen and making executive orders. You know, the right is going to go nuts about King Biden or, autocracy. So he really has to set up the narrative that he had no choice, that he was being obstructed from doing things that are emergent, like addressing climate change. You know, I hope that's what Biden is doing, or at least that's what we can push him to do, because we've got climate disasters piling up right outside and we need action. Here is Nick Tilson. He's the president of NDN Collective. He's talking about how climate change and indigenous movements interact.
The reason why climate change is on absolute escalated levels right now is because we're living in an extractive based economy. And that has been the policy that has supported that extractive based economy. And in the process of building that extractive based economy, they have absolutely stolen and robbed indigenous people's lands and our human rights in the process. Indigenous people have been preserving and protecting biodiversity here in the United States and globally. So you're seeing things come out of the administration, like prioritizing co-management of public lands and return of public lands back to tribes for the purpose of helping fight climate change in the world.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan's 13th also went to discuss the essential need for federal action from the president because of the climate crisis. Here she is.
Friends at the Center for Biological Diversity have a great list for all those listening, a great list of executive actions the president could take today to actually deliver on the promise to be a climate president. The White House and the president need to step up. They need to be bold and courageous. They have failed our communities by passing the bipartisan, infrastructure bill that gutted NEPA and subsidizing fossil fuel industry without the climate investments and mitigations that are in Build Back Better. They both belong together and they should have stayed together. People across the country, no matter where folks live, they want a courageous approach to addressing the impact of climate in their lives. And they know that the federal government has to take a lead on this. And again, time is of the essence. And I know the president can gain so much incredible support, not only from grassroots organizations I've worked with, but other organizations that may be labor community, maybe the sector that's working on green infrastructure. All of them will come to the table and support this effort.
This is how the sausage is made, people. It's talking, it's points, it's calm discussion. And that is why cable news and online algorithms have to have giant fights in order to get out eyeballs and make things way more combative than they absolutely need to be. Although we are in a climate emergency, that's something we could all be upset about. Congresswoman Jayapal, who we saw earlier, comes on next to finish up this segment on what's next for progressive strategy. Shh, don't tell the Republicans.
We are developing our strategy right now, and I think it is a multi-tiered strategy. We need to pass Build Back Better, and we are working right now to figure out how that happens. And I just want to remind everybody that the Congressional Progressive Caucus did endorse the framework that was released on October 28th, that was agreed to by Senator Manchin and given a commitment to by Senator Manchin to the president. And so what we are pushing for is as quickly as possible to pass that. Now, it is less than what the House passed in Build Back Better, We understand that, but it has many of the major components of the things that are transformational, including childcare and pre-K and housing investment and climate investment and elder care investment. These are all major pieces. And there was at least a transition extension of the child tax credit for a year in that framework. So I think that is really, we're trying to stick as close to that as possible, plus whatever immigration provisions we can get. Those were our 5 priorities. And so we're trying to do that. And our goal is to try to pivot back to those discussions, get the agreement, and do as much passage as we can before March 1st when the president comes to give his State of the Union. Mark's going to talk about the executive actions piece, which is a really important part of how we lower costs for families and how we strengthen and show leadership on climate. And so that's a second sort of strategy that we're moving at the same time. And then the third piece of our strategy is a legislative strategy for the rest of the year. Now, some of that involves getting the Senate to put up bills that we have already passed in the House, and we need to at least make sure that people understand and are forced to vote yes or vote no on those. Now, we understand the problems with the filibuster, but that is still really important on something like the Dream and Promise Act, just as an example. Why can't we put that up for a vote in the Senate and force Republicans who say that they support Dreamers to decide whether or not they're actually going to support Dreamers? The same thing with the PRO Act, the same thing with the the Raise the Wage Act. I think we need to make these commitments. But on top of that, the House can pass a few more things that will also make it clear what Democrats stand for. I think of things like dental, vision, and hearing for Medicare expansion. Ana Lilia, this is something you and I worked so closely on last year. Lowering the Medicare eligibility age, passing John Larson's Social Security Act. This is a really important bill that makes necessary changes for seniors. And I think we should get people on the record about whether they support workers, whether they support seniors, whether they support immigrants. So that is the third part of our strategy, is the legislative piece. And I think we're making some progress on all of those things, including our student debt executive action that we're hoping student debt cancellation that we're hoping the president will take.
Gee, wouldn't it be nice if the progressives had a bigger block to leverage in the House instead of letting those seats go to Republicans or corporate Democrats? They've been leveraging their block in the House and even in the Senate. It would be nice to have a progressive block. Well, if we want that, it requires that we support and vote for candidates for the House that are within the Democratic Party. I hear a lot of talk about how folk don't believe in a two-party system. Well, who does? They've been let down by the Dems and betrayed by the Squad and all manner. I've heard all manner of talk of wrong-headed algorithm pleasing talking points on the internet that suggest you should never, ever vote for a Dem. But some of the progressive Dems are trying here. Those lefties, quote unquote, saying never Dem are actually really appealing to your black and white thinking. And they are also helping usher in fascism. We don't need that. We can be grown-ups. We can see that many in the Democratic Party and the party machine itself are bought by corporate interests. And we can still vote for progressives just in case our fatalism is wrong. And we are willing to push toward the miracle. Good things can happen, but not if we just have that fatalism that online talking heads, some, and even, the TV heads on the TV heads are trying to sell us. And in a shameless plug of something I'm doing, but to raise money for progressive candidates who are not taking corporate contributions all over the country. On February 16th, put up the plaque, Giancarlo. I am appearing alongside Marianne Williamson, Brianna Joy Gray, Katie Halper, and Crystal Ball to both showcase some of these candidates and raise some cash and some awareness of these amazing folks. Plus, there's going to be a lot of talk between me and these other 4 fabulous women about the state of progressivism in our country today. Seriously, there are a lot, I've been looking at them, of unbought and unbossed women running for the House this fall. And there are some really good guys, too. We're going to show you them as well. So mark your calendars for 6 to 9 p.m. on next Wednesday, February 16th, right here on act.tv. I'm Julianna Forlano. That's it for the show today. Join us on Thursday, where I have a very special guest. We're going to be talking about the intersection between left policy and left politics and spirituality. That should be a fun one. Thanks for watching. See you then.